The escape pod screamed through Zerion 7's atmosphere like a falling star. Inside, pilot Minho gripped his seat as warning lights flashed red across every surface. His main ship was gone, destroyed by space pirates who'd appeared from nowhere. Now his tiny pod was all that stood between him and the void. "Come on, hold together," he whispered to the shaking metal around him. The heat shields glowed white-hot as friction tore at the hull. His altimeter spun wildly as the dense jungle rushed up to meet him. The impact was brutal. Minho's head snapped forward as the pod carved a deep furrow through towering purple trees. Metal screamed against stone. The safety harness cut into his chest as momentum threw him sideways. Then everything went black. When consciousness returned, pain hit him first. His head throbbed where it had struck the control panel. Warm blood trickled down his forehead, tasting metallic on his lips. The pod's emergency systems beeped weakly, their power nearly spent. Cracks spiderwebbed across the viewport, letting in humid alien air that smelled like rotting flowers, mixed with something sharp and ozone-like. Minho fumbled with his harness, fingers shaking. Every movement sent lightning through his ribs. Probably cracked, he thought. The pod's door hung at an odd angle, twisted by the crash. He kicked it twice before it squealed open. The jungle outside was unlike anything from Earth's databases. Massive trees stretched impossibly high, their bark gleaming with an oil-slick rainbow sheen. Vines thick as his waist hung everywhere, some pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. Strange calls echoed in the distance, not quite birdsongs, but something predatory and alien. Minho checked his emergency beacon. The small device on his wrist showed a weak signal, barely functional after the crash. Help would come eventually, but rescue ships took days to trace emergency beacons across interstellar distances. He was on his own. That's when he heard the footsteps. They were too heavy for any Earth animal and too rhythmic to be random. Something large was moving through the underbrush, breaking branches with casual strength. Minho froze, trying to make himself invisible against the pod's hull. 7 massive shapes emerged from between the trees. At first glance, they looked like walking crocodiles, but their proportions were all wrong. These creatures stood upright on powerful legs, their scaled hides marked with deliberate scars that formed intricate patterns. Bone jewelry hung from their necks and wrists, clicking softly as they moved. The largest one stood nearly 8 feet tall, his green scales darker than the others. Muscles rippled under his hide as he pointed a crude but deadly-looking spear directly at Minho's chest. The weapon's tip was carved from some kind of black stone, sharp enough to cut shadows. The aliens began chattering in a language that sounded like insects clicking mixed with low growls. Their yellow eyes never left Minho as they formed a perfect circle around him. One of them, smaller but covered in more elaborate scars, approached cautiously. Minho raised his hands slowly, palms out. "Hey there, I'm friendly. Just had a little accident here." His voice came out higher than intended, fear making it crack. The scarred alien tilted its head, studying him like a puzzle. It reached out with one clawed finger and poked Minho's arm, testing the give of his flesh. The creature then brought its finger to its nose, sniffing carefully before breaking into what could only be described as a grin. Rows of needle-sharp teeth gleamed in the filtered sunlight. The alien turned to its companions and made a series of excited clicks. The others responded with what sounded distinctly like laughter, but hungrier than any human laugh Minho had ever heard. Before he could react, thick vines wrapped around his wrists with practiced efficiency. The aliens worked together like they'd done this many times before. Minho struggled, but the bindings were too strong and too well tied. As they hoisted him between them like a hunting trophy, Minho realized the horrible truth. To these creatures, he wasn't a crashed pilot in need of help. He wasn't even a potential threat to be cautious about. He was dinner. The Vicari hunting party moved through the alien forest like they owned it. Minho stumbled between 2 of the larger warriors, his bound hands making every step a challenge. The thick vines around his wrists had already started cutting into his skin, and blood trickled down his fingers. His head still pounded from the sea. Crash! Every few steps the world would spin slightly, making him sway. The aliens noticed his weakness and seemed to find it amusing. They'd click and hiss to each other, pointing at him whenever he nearly fell. Elder Kyungmin walked at the front of the group, and Minho couldn't take his eyes off what the old hunter carried. 3 long spears, but these weren't weapons. The metal tips were flat and wide, designed for cooking rather than killing. Intricate symbols were carved into the handles, worn smooth by countless hands. This wasn't their first hunting trip. God, they really are going to eat me, Minho whispered to himself, trying to keep panic from taking over. He'd heard stories from other pilots about cannibal planets, but he'd always thought they were just spacer tales meant to scare rookies. The forest around them glowed with an otherworldly beauty that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. Mushrooms the size of dinner plates clung to tree trunks, pulsing with soft blue light. Flowers that looked like crystalline bells chimed softly when the wind touched them. But Minho barely noticed the wonder around him. The other hunters were busy gathering plants as they walked. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly what they were looking for. One alien plucked purple leaves from a vine, crushing them between his claws and nodding approvingly at the scent. Another gathered small orange berries, popping one into his mouth to test the flavor before collecting more. Minho's stomach turned as he realized what he was watching. These weren't random plants, they were seasonings. The aliens were literally shopping for herbs to cook him with, treating this like a trip to the grocery store. "You know, I'm probably pretty tough," he called out desperately, though he knew they couldn't understand him. "Lots of gristle, probably taste terrible. You really don't want to eat me." Kyungmin glanced back at him and made a sound that might have been laughter. The old hunter reached into a pouch and pulled out what looked like rock salt mixed with dried spices. He held it up for Minho to see, then mimed sprinkling it over food. "Oh, come on," Minho groaned. Even the seasoning was already prepared. The march continued for what felt like hours. Minho's legs ached, and his throat was dry as dust. The aliens showed no signs of fatigue, their powerful frames built for long journeys through difficult terrain. They chatted among themselves in their clicking language, occasionally gesturing at Minho in ways that made his skin crawl. Then he smelled it. Smoke. At first it was just a hint on the wind, barely noticeable among the forest's natural scents. But as they walked further it grew stronger. Wood smoke, but with an undertone of something else, something that made Minho's mouth water despite his terror. The sound came next. Drums, beating in a steady rhythm that seemed to match his racing. Heartbeat. Then voices joined in, alien but unmistakably celebratory. The hunting party quickened their pace, excited by the sounds of home. Through gaps in the canopy, Minho could see columns of smoke rising into the purple sky. The village was close now. He could hear children's voices mixed with the adults. High-pitched clicks and whistles that somehow sounded happy and eager. They were celebrating his arrival. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a hunting party returning with dinner. This was a special occasion. He was the guest of honor at his own execution. Kyungmin raised his spears high above his head and let out a triumphant roar. The other hunters joined in, their voices echoing through the trees. From somewhere ahead, answering calls came back, growing louder as more voices joined the chorus. Minho's emergency beacon continued its weak blinking on his wrist, but rescue felt impossibly far away. He had maybe hours before these aliens decided he was ready for the pot. Time was running out, and he had no idea how to save himself. The drums grew louder with each step, pulling him toward a fate he couldn't escape. In the sacred grove at the heart of the Vikari village, High Priestess Nari sat cross-legged before the ancient crystal formations. The blue stones hummed with energy that her people had worshipped for generations. Her weathered hands moved in slow practice patterns as she entered the deep meditation that connected her to the spirit world. At 70 seasons old, Nari had seen more visions than any priestess before her. She could read the flow of spiritual energy like others read the wind. Today, something felt different. The crystals pulsed with an unsettling rhythm. The vision hit her without warning. Fire. Everywhere, consuming everything she had ever known. The great trees that had stood for 1,000 years crumbled to ash. The crystal formations cracked and went dark. Her people ran screaming through streets that burned with flames that wouldn't die. At the center of the destruction stood a small figure with pale skin and strange clothing. the sky being that her hunters would soon bring home. But in the vision he wasn't helpless. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, power that her people couldn't understand or control. Nari gasped, and her eyes snapped open. Cold sweat covered her scaled skin despite the warm afternoon air. In all her years as priestess, she had never seen a vision so clear, so filled with immediate danger. The drums had started. She could hear Kyungmin's victory roar echoing through the forest. The hunting party was returning, and they were bringing the creature from her vision. Nari struggled to her feet, her old joints protesting after hours of sitting. She grabbed her ceremonial staff and hurried toward the village center as fast as her aged legs could carry her. People were already gathering, excited by the hunters' calls. Children ran between the huts, chattering about the feast to come. Chief Boram stood waiting at the village entrance, his massive frame decorated with the bones of ancient enemies. His ceremonial headdress caught the light, polished skulls gleaming like jewels. The chief loved these moments when the hunters returned with fresh meat for the tribe. "The sky gods smile on us today," Boram announced to the growing crowd. "Ah, hunters bring us a gift from beyond the stars." The hunting party emerged from the forest, carrying their prize between them. Nari felt her breath catch as she saw the sky being for the first time. He was smaller than she'd expected, fragile-looking, compared to her warrior people. His skin was an odd pinkish color, and his eyes held an intelligence that made her scales prickle with unease. But it was more than his appearance that disturbed her. Something invisible surrounded him, an energy that made the very air seem to bend. Her spiritual senses, honed by decades of practice, screamed warnings. This creature was dangerous in ways her people couldn't imagine. The crowd cheered as the hunters displayed their catch. Already, some villagers were gathering wood for the cooking fires. Others discussed which seasonings would work best with sky-being meat. The excitement was building toward a celebration that Nari knew would destroy them all. "Wait," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd turned to her, surprised by the urgency in her tone. Boram frowned, his celebration interrupted. "What troubles you, priestess? The meat is fresh. Why should we delay?" Nari thought quickly. She couldn't tell them about her vision directly. They would think her old mind was failing. But she needed time to understand what the spirits were trying to warn her about. "I have received signs from the ancestors," she said, making her voice sound mysterious and important. "They speak of great power within this sky being. If we consume him without proper ritual, his foreign spirits will curse our bloodline for 7 generations. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Vicari took spiritual matters seriously, especially when it came to curses. Boram's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "What do the spirits demand?" he asked. 3 days of purification," Nari said firmly. "The sky being must be cleansed of his alien energies before he can safely feed our people. Otherwise, his strange magic will poison our children and blight our crops." Boram considered this. He was a practical leader, but he wasn't foolish enough to ignore spiritual warnings. The tribe had prospered under Nari's guidance for many years. Very well, he decided. 3 days, but no longer. The meat will spoil if we wait too long. Nari nodded, relief flooding through her. 3 days wasn't much time, but it might be enough to understand what the spirits were trying to tell her. As the crowd reluctantly dispersed, she studied the sky being more carefully. Minho looked back at her with desperate eyes, not understanding the words, but clearly sensing that something important had just happened. Nari saw intelligence there, and something else. Hope, perhaps. The priestess made a decision that would change everything. She would learn more about this strange creature and the power that surrounded him. The vision had shown her destruction, but visions could be warnings as well as prophecies. Maybe there was still time to change the future. The bamboo cage sat in the shadow of the great temple, its bars thick enough to hold much larger prey than Minho. He'd spent the night listening to the sounds of preparation echoing through the village, sharpening stones scraping against metal, children practicing celebration songs, the steady rhythm of drums that seemed to count down his remaining hours. When dawn broke over Zerion 7, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Minho was surprised to see an elderly alien approaching his prison. Unlike the warriors who'd captured him, this one moved with careful dignity. Her scales were lighter than the others, marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to tell stories across her weathered skin. Nari carried a wooden bowl in one hand and a collection of colorful fruits in the other. She set them down just outside the cage and studied Minho with eyes that held intelligence rather than hunger. "Water," she said in heavily accented but recognizable galactic standard. The word came out rough, like she hadn't used it in years. Minho nearly fell over in shock. "You speak standard," he gasped, scrambling closer to the bars. Nari tilted her head, searching for words. "Little bit. Long time ago, sky metal fell. Had boxes with speaking sounds." She gestured vaguely toward the forest. "I learned small words before boxes stopped working." The crashed ships. Minho realized that other vessels must have gone down on this planet over the years. The crew probably hadn't survived, but their emergency language programs had taught this. Alien Priestess fragments of his language. "My name is Minho," he said slowly, pointing to himself. "I'm a pilot. My ship crashed." "Minho," Nari repeated, the sounds strange in her mouth. She pointed to herself. "Nari, I am—" "Spirit speaker?" "Words to ancestors person." "Priestess," Minho offered. "You're a priestess." Nari nodded, pleased to learn the correct term. She pushed the water bowl through the bars and Minho drank gratefully. The liquid was cool and tasted faintly of minerals. Better than anything he'd had since the crash. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "Your people want to eat me." Nari's expression grew troubled. She looked around to make sure they were alone, then knelt beside the cage. "Spirits show me bad seeing, fire, death. If we eat you, all die." She picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt. First, she sketched a simple figure representing Minho. Then flames around him, spreading outward to consume stick figure Vicari. Her artistic skills were limited, but the message was clear. "You think I'm dangerous?" Minho asked. "Not you. Thing inside you. Power we not understand." Nari tapped the drawing. "Sky people have magic we cannot see." Minho almost laughed, but something in her serious expression stopped him. "It's not magic, it's technology, science." Nari frowned, not recognizing the words. Minho tried again, pointing to his emergency beacon. "This makes light. It calls to my people across the stars. No magic, just tools." The priestess leaned closer, fascinated by the blinking device. Her eyes widened as she studied the tiny lights and the strange symbols on its display. "It talks to sky spirits," she whispered. "In a way, yes." Minho decided not to complicate. Things with explanations about radio waves and satellites. "My people have many tools like this. We use them to help others." Nari began drawing again, this time showing Vicari villages. But these drawings looked different from her first ones. The stick figure people were bent over, some lying down. Plants drooped and died. "Our young ones get sick," she explained, her voice heavy with sadness. "Many die before they see 10 seasons. Our food plants stop growing strong. We not know why." Minho studied the crude drawings, and understanding began to dawn. "Disease? Sickness?" He mimed coughing and pointed to the sick figures. Nari nodded vigorously. "Yes. Sickness comes, takes children. Nothing we do helps." Minho's mind raced. His emergency medical kit was still in his crashed pod, but he had a basic diagnostic scanner built into his suit. He'd been so focused on escape that he hadn't thought about what he might offer these people. "I might be able to help," he said, carefully. "My tools can see sickness, sometimes fix it." He activated his suit's medical scanner, and Nari gasped as holographic readings appeared in the air above his wrist. The display showed his vital signs in glowing blue numbers. Information that looked like pure magic to her eyes. "Sky magic," she breathed, reaching toward the display with one trembling claw. "Not magic," Minho insisted, but he could see she didn't believe him. To someone who'd never seen technology, it would look supernatural. "But yes, it can help sick people." Nari stared at the scanner for a long moment, her mind working. Finally, she looked up at Minho with an expression he recognized, despite their different species. It was the look of a parent willing to do anything to save her children. "If you help young ones," she said slowly, "maybe spirits change bad seeing, maybe fire not come." Minho felt a spark of hope for the first time since his capture. I want to help. But your people want to cook me, Nari nodded grimly. Chief Boram gives 3 days. After that, she drew a line across her throat. 3 days to prove his worth. 3 days to turn from dinner into doctor. Minho looked at the glowing scanner on his wrist and made a decision that would change both their worlds. Then we better get started, he said. The village fell quiet after midnight, with only the soft glow of bioluminescent fungi providing light along the dirt paths. Nari moved like a shadow between the huts, her aged frame surprisingly graceful in the darkness. She'd waited until even the night guards had settled into their routine patrols before making her move. Minho was awake when she reached his cage, having spent hours staring at the alien stars through the bamboo bars. The sound of her approaching footsteps made him sit up hopefully. Time to prove sky magic is real, Nari whispered, producing a bone key from beneath her robes. The lock clicked open with barely a sound. Minho's heart raced as he stepped out of the cage for the first time in 2 days. If they catch us, then we both die, Nari finished grimly. But children die now anyway, must try. She led him through narrow alleyways between sleeping huts, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every stone and shadow in the village. The sick ward was a larger building near the temple, built specifically to isolate those afflicted with the mysterious plague that had been killing Vikari young for 3 seasons. The smell hit Minho before they even entered. Death and disease hung in the air like a physical presence. Inside, small forms lay on woven mats, their breathing shallow and labored. Parents sat beside them, keeping hopeless vigils in the dim light. "Goddess protect us," one mother whispered, as she saw Nari enter with the sky being. "Priestess, what are you doing?" "Bringing hope," Nari replied firmly. "The sky spirits sent him to help our children." Minho knelt beside the nearest child, a small Vikari who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Her scales had lost their healthy sheen, turning dull and grey. Her breathing came in sharp, painful gasps that reminded him of pneumonia cases he'd seen during his medical training. He activated his diagnostic scanner, and several parents gasped as the holographic display lit up the room. The readings were worse than he'd feared. Bacterial infection, severe dehydration, malnutrition from inability to keep food down. Without treatment, none of these children would survive another week. "I need to get supplies from my crashed ship," Minho told Nari. "Medicine that can fight the sickness." Nari spoke quickly to the watching parents, explaining in terms they could understand. The Sky Being's magic box had shown him the evil spirits causing the plague, and he had weapons to fight them. It wasn't exactly accurate, but it got the message across. 2 hours later, they returned from the crash site with Minho's emergency medical kit. His hands shook as he prepared the first dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics. He'd never treated an alien species before, but the scanner readings suggested their biology was similar enough to human that standard treatments might work. The first injection went into the sickest child, a little boy who'd been unconscious for days. Minho held his breath as he administered the dose, praying that he wasn't about to accidentally poison the child instead of healing him. Within hours, the boy's fever broke. His breathing eased, and for the first time in days, he opened his eyes and asked for water. The parents wept with joy, falling to their knees and pressing their foreheads to the ground before Minho. "Sky Father," they whispered. "Divine healer." Minho treated 6 more children that night, adjusting dosages based on body weight and symptom severity. He also set up water purification tablets in the communal wells, suspecting that contaminated water had helped spread the disease. By dawn, every treated child was showing improvement. Word spread through the village like wildfire, carried in hushed whispers by amazed parents. The Sky Being had performed miracles. The divine spirits had sent a healer disguised as prey. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. Warrior Yun Wu had noticed Nari's late-night activities. As head of the temple guard, it was his job to watch for unusual behavior, especially from someone as important as the High Priestess. When he saw her sneaking around with the prisoner, every instinct told him something was wrong. The next evening, he followed them at a distance, watching from the shadows as Nari led Minho to the sick ward again. He saw the strange lights, heard the grateful prayers of the parents, witnessed the impossible recoveries. But where others saw divine intervention, Yunwu saw corruption. The sky being was clearly using some form of dark magic to bewitch their priestess. How else could she justify freeing the very creature meant to feed their people? This is wrong, he muttered to himself, gripping his spear tighter. The old ways are being forgotten. The spirits of our ancestors would be furious. He thought of Chief Boram, who'd reluctantly agreed to the 3-day delay. The chief trusted Nari's wisdom, but he also trusted Yunwu to report anything suspicious. The warrior's duty was clear. As Minho finished treating the last child, carefully recording dosages and monitoring responses, he had no idea that hostile eyes were watching from the darkness. The miraculous healings had won him supporters among the desperate parents, but they'd also created a powerful enemy. Yunwu slipped away into the night, already planning how to report this betrayal to the chief. The sky being's magic was strong, but Vakari steel was stronger. This corruption would end even if it meant defying the High Priestess herself. The battle for Minho's life was about to begin, and not everyone wanted him to win. By the third morning, the entire village buzzed with whispered conversations about the sky being's impossible powers. The healed children played in the streets for the first time in months, their scales bright and healthy again. Their grateful parents couldn't stop. Talking about the miracle they'd witnessed, Minho found himself at the center of a storm he never expected. As he sat in his cage, now left unlocked during the day, curious Vakari approached constantly. Some brought offerings of fruit and flowers, treating him like a divine figure. Others kept their distance, making protective gestures with their claws whenever they looked his way. "Skyfather blessed our little Kektu," whispered Mira, the mother of the first child he'd treated. She knelt outside his cage, holding up her healthy son for Minho to see. "Before you came, he was dying. Now he runs and laughs again." But not everyone shared her gratitude. Elder Tokran, one of the tribe's most respected traditionalists, gathered. "This is not natural," he declared, his scarred hide gleaming in the morning sun. "Our ancestors fought sky demons before. They bring false gifts to corrupt our souls." His supporters nodded grimly. "The old stories warn of this," agreed Hunter. "Vexka, beautiful magic that leads to destruction. We should burn the creature before it brings worse curses." The divide split families and friendships. Brothers argued over whether Minho was savior or threat. Marriage partners found themselves on opposite sides of heated debates. The tension grew thicker each hour, and Chief Boram felt the pressure mounting from every direction. Nari worked frantically to bridge the gap between the two factions. She spent her days translating Minho's explanations of medicine and technology into concepts her people could accept. "The sky ancestors crafted these healing tools before time began," she explained to a gathering of worried parents. "They placed tiny spirit warriors inside these medicines to fight the evil sickness demons that plague our children." Minho listened to her creative translations with amazement. When he tried to explain bacteria and antibiotics, she turned them into invisible evil spirits and warrior medicines blessed by ancient gods. His water purification tablets became sacred stones that cleanse demon poison from our wells. "You're making me sound like some kind of wizard," he told her during one of their private conversations. "Your people's magic is too strange for them to understand as it truly is," Nari replied. "But they can understand gifts from divine ancestors. It is the same truth, just dressed in different words." The strategy worked with some villagers, but it backfired with others. Warrior Yunwu used Nari's spiritual explanations as evidence of corruption. "Listen to how the priestess speaks now," he argued to Chief Boram during a private meeting. "She calls demon magic holy. She breaks our laws to serve this creature. The sky being has bewitched her mind." Boram rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of leadership crushing down on him. Half his people wanted to worship Minho as a god. The other half wanted to execute him as a demon. Both sides looked to their chief for guidance he didn't know how to give. "The healing is real," Boram said slowly. "I have seen the children recover with my own eyes. How can we call such good work evil?" "Because it comes at a price we don't yet understand," Yunwu insisted. "The old stories teach us that sky demons always ask for something in return. What will this creature demand once he has our complete trust? Meanwhile, Minho watched the growing conflict with increasing worry. He could see the village splitting apart, friend turning against friend. His presence was destroying the unity that had kept these people strong for generations. Maybe I should leave, he told Nari. Find another way to survive until rescue. Comes, I'm tearing your people apart. No, Nari said firmly. The spirits showed me fire and destruction if we follow the old path. Your healing gifts prove that a new way is possible, but change is always painful, especially for those who fear it. The crisis came to a head when young Risa, one of the children Minho had saved, collapsed during a game with her friends. The antibiotics had cured her infection, but she'd pushed herself too hard too soon, and her weakened body couldn't handle the strain. As concerned parents gathered around the unconscious child, the two factions erupted into open confrontation. "The demon's magic is failing," shouted Tokran. "He poisoned our children with false healing." "She's just tired from playing," Mira countered desperately. "The Sky Father's blessing doesn't make them invincible." Angry voices rose on both sides. Hands moved to weapon hilts. The crowd pressed closer, ready to explode into violence that would destroy everything Nari and Minho had worked to build. Chief Boram stood frozen, knowing that whatever decision he made next would determine not just Minho's fate, but the future of his entire people. The moment of choice had arrived, and there was no middle ground left to stand on. The village held its breath, waiting to see which way their leader would turn. The moment Chief Boram made his decision, the entire village fell silent. He stood in the center of the gathering, his massive frame casting long shadows in the afternoon light. The unconscious child lay between the two factions like a symbol of everything that divided them. "Enough," Boram's voice boomed across the crowd. "I have listened to both sides. I have seen the healing, but I have also seen the division it brings. The old ways have kept us strong for 1,000 seasons. We will not abandon them for the promises of a sky demon." Nari felt her heart sink as the chief continued. "The 3 days are ended. Tonight we feast as our ancestors intended. The sky being will fulfill his purpose and feed our people." Boram's words carried the weight of final judgment. Perhaps consuming his strange powers will grant us his healing gifts without the corruption that follows. Cheers erupted from Tokran's supporters. Yunwu nodded approvingly, his hand resting on his spear. The traditionalists had won and they knew it, but Nari had not survived 70 seasons by accepting defeat easily. "I challenge that decision," she declared, her aged voice somehow cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd gasped. Challenging. A chief's judgment was rare but not unheard of. However, what she said next shocked everyone into stunned silence. "I invoke the right of spiritual combat. If the ancestors truly support your choice, Chief Boram, then let them prove it. I claim leadership of this tribe in the name of the sky spirits who sent us this healer." Boram's eyes widened. The right of spiritual combat was ancient law, older than anyone alive. When invoked, it meant the challenger believed the current leader had lost divine favor. The contest would be decided not by physical strength, but by demonstrations of spiritual power. "You would challenge me, old priestess?" Boram asked, his voice mixing respect with disbelief. "I have led this tribe through war and famine. What signs can you show that would surpass my accomplishments?" Nari turned to Minho, who watched from his cage with growing alarm. She'd explained the situation to him in urgent whispers, and he'd shared what few technological tricks he had available. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. "I will show the tribe powers that no earthbound spirit could grant," Nari announced. "The sky ancestors have given me weapons of light and transformation that prove their favor." The crowd formed a circle around the two leaders. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders for a better view. Even the traditionalists watched with fascination, eager to see what the old priestess thought she could accomplish. Boram went first, as was his right as the challenged leader. He performed the traditional rituals of power, calling on earth spirits and ancestor voices. His deep voice chanted prayers that had been spoken for generations. He drew sacred symbols in the dirt with ceremonial powders that glowed faintly in the fading light. The display was impressive, steeped in the weight of tradition and ancestral approval. The crowd murmured appreciatively. Boram's connection to the old ways was strong and undeniable. Then Nari stepped forward. She held up a small device that Minho had given her, his emergency laser pointer, modified with a simple lens attachment he'd crafted from his suit's visor. To the Vicari, it looked like a sacred crystal wrapped in sky metal. "Behold the fire of stars," Nari intoned, activating the device. A brilliant red beam shot across the gathering space, brighter than any earthly flame. Gasps rose from the crowd as she moved the beam, painting patterns of light in the air that seemed to hang there like burning spirits. The laser reflected off the temple's crystal formations, creating a dazzling display that made the entire sacred grove sparkle with supernatural radiance. But she wasn't finished. Minho had also given her a small chemical reaction kit from his emergency supplies, basic components that could create impressive but harmless effects. Nari mixed the compounds with the dramatic flair of someone who'd spent decades performing rituals. "The Sky Ancestors grant me dominion over the very essence of creation," she declared, dropping the mixture into a bowl of water. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. Brilliant blue flames erupted from the bowl, dancing higher than any normal fire. The flames changed color as different chemicals ignited, blue to green to gold, creating a rainbow of fire that defied everything the Vicari understood about the natural world. The crowd stared in awe. Even some of Boram's strongest supporters began to look uncertain. This was power beyond anything they'd ever witnessed, beyond anything their traditions could explain. "Impossible," whispered Tok'ran, his earlier confidence cracking. "The Sky Spirits have chosen," Nari announced, her voice carrying new authority. "They send us healing and knowledge, but only if we are wise enough to accept their gifts. Will we cling to old fears, or will we embrace the divine wisdom they offer?" Boram stood frozen, watching his support crumble as villagers began dropping to their knees before Nari's impossible display. The laser beam continued to dance overhead, while the magical flames. The old chief realized he was witnessing the end of an era. The question was whether he would fight it to the bitter end, or find the wisdom to accept that change had come to his people, whether he wanted it or not. Minho watched from his cage, amazed at how a simple laser pointer and some emergency flares could reshape the destiny of an entire civilization. The rainbow flames finally died down, leaving only wisps of colored smoke curling into the evening air. The laser pointer's red beam faded as Nari lowered the device, but its afterimage seemed burned into every watching eye. The silence stretched so long that Minho could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Chief Boram stood motionless, his weathered face showing the weight of a decision that would echo through generations. Around him, his people waited for guidance, but for the first time in his long rule, he had none to give. "The Sky Ancestors have spoken," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "Their power flows through you, Nari. I cannot stand against the will of divine spirits." Boram removed his ceremonial headdress, the polished bones catching the last light of day. He placed it at Nari's feet with the slow dignity of a leader who understood when his time had passed. "I yield leadership to the chosen of the Sky Spirits," he declared. "May your wisdom guide our people better than mine." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, caught up in the excitement of witnessing impossible magic. Others wept, mourning the end of traditions that had shaped their lives. But even the most resistant traditionalists couldn't deny what they'd seen with their own eyes. Nari picked up the headdress with trembling hands. At 70 seasons old, she'd never expected to lead her people. But the spirits had shown her a path forward, and she would follow it wherever it led. "My first act as chief is to declare a new covenant," she announced, her voice carrying across the silent village. "The Sky Being will live among us, not as prey but as teacher. He will share the wisdom of the star spirits, and in return, we will protect him as one of our own." Minho felt relief flood through him so powerfully that his legs nearly gave out. He was going to live. More than that, he had a chance to actually help these people instead of ending up as their dinner, but not everyone was ready to celebrate. Warrior Yunwu stepped forward, his scarred face grim with reluctant acceptance. "So the old chief has yielded to your power, Nari, but power alone does not make wisdom. How do we know this sky being won't corrupt our young with his strange ways? It was a fair question, and Nari treated it with the respect it deserved. Because we will learn together, she replied. The sky spirits have given him knowledge of healing and tool-making, but we have knowledge too, the wisdom of living in harmony with this world, the strength that comes from honoring our ancestors. She gestured toward Minho's cage. He will teach us the secrets of the stars. We will teach him the secrets of the earth. Both wisdoms together will make us stronger than either could alone. Minho found his voice at last. I want to learn, he said, addressing the crowd directly. Your priestess, your chief, has shown me that there's more to strength than technology. Your people survived and thrived here for generations without star knowledge. That wisdom is just as valuable as anything I can share. Elder Tokran, who'd led the opposition just hours earlier, studied Minho with calculating eyes. You speak of learning our ways, but will you truly honor them, or will you secretly work to replace them with your sky magic? I've seen what happens when people ignore the wisdom of those who came before, Minho replied honestly. On my world, we've made terrible mistakes by thinking new was always better than old. I don't want to repeat those errors here. Over the following days, an unprecedented experiment began. Minho shared basic scientific principles, but he did it carefully, respectfully. He explained germ theory by building on their existing understanding of evil spirits. He demonstrated simple chemistry by showing how it connected to their traditional medicine-making. In return, the Vakari taught him about their world. He learned which plants could heal and which could kill. He discovered weather patterns that no satellite could have predicted. Most importantly, he began to understand how their spiritual beliefs weren't primitive superstition, but sophisticated ways of organizing knowledge about their environment. Yunwu remained skeptical but fair. He assigned himself as Minho's primary guard, not to imprison him but to watch for signs of corruption or deception. Gradually, as he saw Minho's genuine respect for Vakari customs, the warrior's hostility softened into grudging acceptance. You are not what I expected a sky demon to be, Yunwu admitted one evening as they sat by the cooking fires. You ask questions instead of giving commands. You listen to our elders instead of dismissing their knowledge. I'm learning that wisdom can wear many different faces, Minho replied. On my world, we thought we were advanced because we could fly between stars, but we never learned how to live in true harmony with our environment the way your people have. The village, slowly, adapted to its new reality. Children who'd been healed by Minho's medicine began learning basic mathematics alongside traditional hunting skills. Craftsmen experimented with new techniques while preserving ancient arts. The sick ward that had once been a place of despair became a center of learning where alien science and native wisdom worked together. Nari watched it all with satisfaction, knowing that the spirits had guided her correctly. The vision of fire and destruction was fading, replaced by something far more valuable, the birth of a truly new kind of wisdom that honored both sky and earth. The future stretched ahead of them, uncertain but full of possibility. The high-pitched beeping started at dawn, cutting through the peaceful sounds of the awakening village. Minho bolted upright from his sleeping mat, recognizing the sound immediately. His emergency beacon wasn't just blinking anymore, it was singing with the joy of an established connection. What is that noise? Asked Kira, one of the young Vakari, who'd been learning basic electronics from him. She covered her earholes with her claws, wincing at the unfamiliar sound. Minho's hands shook as he checked the beacon's display. Clear signal strength, confirmed lock-on rescue vessel, estimated arrival time 6 hours. It's my people, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're coming for me. The words should have filled him with relief. For weeks, he'd dreamed of this moment, the arrival of a rescue ship that would take him away from this alien world and back to civilization. Back to hot showers and familiar food and people who spoke his language without clicking their tongues. Instead, he felt his heart sinking into his stomach. The news spread through the village faster than wildfire. Within minutes, Vakari emerged from their huts, chattering excitedly about the sky people who were coming. Children who'd grown comfortable around Minho now looked at him with fresh eyes, suddenly remembering that he was different, that he'd always been meant to leave. Nari found him sitting by the temple steps, staring at the beacon with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Your star family comes for you," she said, settling beside him with the careful movements of her advanced age. "This is good news, yes. You will return to your own people." Minho looked up at her weathered face, marked with the tattoos that told the story of her long life. In the past weeks, he'd learned to read those markings like a book. The curved lines around her eyes spoke of laughter and sorrow. The geometric patterns on her forehead marked her wisdom and spiritual authority. She'd become more than just an alien who'd saved his life. She'd become the closest thing to a grandmother he'd ever known. "I don't know if it's good news," he admitted. "6 weeks ago I would have said yes without thinking. But now?" He gestured toward the village around them. Children played games that mixed traditional Vakari sports with simple physics lessons he'd taught them. Adults worked with tools that combined ancient crafting techniques with basic engineering principles. The sick ward had been transformed into a learning center where old healing wisdom merged with modern medical knowledge. "I helped build this," Minho continued. "We all did. And if I leave now, who's going to keep the bridge strong between the old ways and the new ones?" Nari studied him with eyes that had seen 7 decades of change. "You think your people will not understand what you have found here?" "I think they'll see primitives who need to be uplifted," Minho said honestly. "They'll want to build proper cities and establish trade routes and turn your world into another colony. They won't understand that you don't need fixing. You need partnership." The old priestess nodded slowly. She'd worried about the same thing since the day she'd first seen Minho's healing technology. Power often corrupted those who wielded it, and the power gap between the stars and the earth was vast indeed. "What if there was another choice?" she asked carefully. "What if you could stay and still serve your star people? Not as runaway, but as, what is word? Ambassador." Minho's eyes widened as he understood what she was suggesting. "You want me to be a permanent liaison between our species?" "I want you to be what you have already become," Nari replied. "Bridge builder, teacher of both sides. The Vakari need someone who understands star wisdom but respects earth wisdom. Your people need someone who can help." The rescue ship's engines became audible as a distant rumble, growing stronger by the minute. Soon, Minho would have to make a choice that would shape not just his own future, but the relationship between 2 entire civilizations. Young Kira approached hesitantly, carrying a necklace woven from native fibers and decorated with small pieces of metal from Minho's crashed pod. Behind her came other villagers, children he'd taught, adults he'd learned from, warriors who'd gone from wanting to eat him to accepting him as family. "We made this for you," Kira said shyly, holding up the necklace. "So, you remember us when you fly among the stars." Minho took the gift with trembling hands, feeling the weight of their hopes and fears. The metal fragments caught the morning light, creating tiny rainbows that reminded him of Nari's leadership challenge, what felt like a lifetime ago. The rescue ship appeared on the horizon, sleek and silver against the purple sky. It represented everything he'd lost when the pirates destroyed his vessel: safety, familiarity, a return to the life he'd always known. But as he looked at the faces surrounding him, Minho realized he'd found something here that he'd never had before. Purpose. A community that needed him not for what he could give them, but for what they could build together. "Nari," he said, his decision crystallizing like a revelation. "When my people land, would you be willing to meet with them? To help me explain why staying might be the most important job I could ever do?" The old chief smiled, her scarred features lighting up with pride and relief. "I think, Minho of the stars, that the spirits brought you here for exactly this reason. Above them, the rescue ship began its descent, carrying representatives of a civilization about to discover that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not when you leave home,